Thomas Lord's third ground, 150 years old in 1964. Lord's, where, between official functions and the downpours, the Australians found all too little time for net practice and getting to grips with English wickets so different from their own. Nottingham and Trent Bridge, and to a match where players and spectators alike spent as much time speculating about the weather as the play. 11:30, the dramatic moment, then delayed by rain. The first ball of a test series between England and Australia, delivered with his natural grace by Mackenzie, and bowled to the most interesting young cricketer in England, Geoffrey Boycott, playing his first test innings. Unspectacular, almost unobtrusive, but a batsman in the Yorkshire manner, never out of line, almost savage in his concentration. At the other end, Corling bowled the first ball of his test career to Fred Titmus, comfortingly sound so far as English followers were concerned for a makeshift opener. He was sent in first because Edrich reported unfit on the morning of the match. Boycott dropped when he'd made 6, justified those who described him as cast in the mould of Herbert Sutcliffe by playing the next ball as if nothing had happened. But he and his friends felt a great deal happier when, coming out of his unwinking defence, he hit Hawke assertively through the covers for 4.
And try not to give the bowler anything, because I don't expect he'll give me anything.
Rain livened up the wicket, and the batsmen struggled in the gloom. Towards the end of the 85 minutes play before the rain closed down, there were a few aggressive gestures by Dexter, but he and England could count themselves lucky to lose only 1 wicket for 52 runs in those conditions. The tone of the second day was set in its earliest minutes. Dexter set out to carry the fight to Australia, but the pitch had none of its traditional generosity to batsmen, and though he escaped O'Neill's attempt to catch him, Dexter survived only to the next ball. The hour after that showed Boycott and Cowdrey doing what English batsmen probably do best, playing on an awkward pitch. There were some to say that, for lack of experience, the Australian bowlers didn't exploit the wicket as they might have done, and certainly they didn't always make the batsmen play at the ball. Nevertheless, some difficult bowling was handled with something very near to mastery by Cowdrey and Boycott, until Boycott, only 2 short of the 50 he'd earned, and anyway, to prove England's top scorer, was out to such a catch as makes Bobby Simpson the world's finest slip fieldsman. Hawke probably was unlucky, only to take 3 wickets, but Vevers, starting late, showed that he'd learned more than a little about off-spin since he came to England. For the rest of the time to lunch, Barrington stayed with Cowdrey, but in the afternoon, once Cowdrey was out, no one stayed very long. Some of them barely any time at all, though the Australians dropped more catches than their sides usually do. Sharp and Allen hung on, not trying to force the pace. Inexplicably, as it seemed to those who clamoured for an English declaration, they stayed until the last of the rain stoppages, when Allen was caught off Mackenzie by Grant. Sharp, metaphorically speaking, kept his pads on until Monday, for Saturday was tragically washed out. And then Dexter declared. Cold will always pose his problems for those unaccustomed to the movement of the ball in English conditions, and Truman has never been one to extend mercy to non-batsmen. So, for all Simpson's top score of the Australian innings, his supporters were cut down, and England were left with a first innings lead of 48. Because Boycott had broken a finger fielding, Dexter opened the second English innings with Titmus, an extremely unexpected pair, and an extremely unexpected innings, For in the grim grey light that was the setting of this test, Dexter proceeded to play as only he among current English batsmen can play. His beginnings were anxious, sometimes almost desperate. Then, beyond the power of bowlers or fieldsmen to curb him, he was galloping away. The great innings often come when no one expects them. Why should this one have happened? Yet it did. Happened unforgettably for anyone who saw it. Suddenly, vividly, England had taken such a grasp on the game as it hadn't known before. On the fifth day, the game twisted again. Dexter. The English batting, which had seemed secure, first congealed and then threw itself away. And after England had scored at only 50 an hour, they asked Australia to make 242 at 76 an hour. And Australia didn't shrink from the challenge. Laurie set himself one run too many. And then the Truman-O'Neill battle was joined once more, to be suspended, not settled, by a retired Hurt when Australia were not far off their run rate. And then when, given good weather, we might have seen one of the greatest of all finishes between England and Australia, the rain, the last infuriating word. The crowd, patient as Job, day after day, the crowd got up and slowly walked away. The same sky that lowered over Trent Bridge had moved on to Lord's. Thursday and Friday were days of seemingly endless mopping up. Saturday was the day of Truman. Out of form, out of wickets, if some critics had been selectors, out of the test team. He began bowling faster than he'd done all the season to his old enemy, Bill Lawrie, and their particular battle was closely joined from the start. This time, it went to Truman. Then, immediately, came yet another Truman-O'Neill duel. There was too little of O'Neill for the crowd's liking. Did Dexter feed his hook deliberately? Did he give him this 4 in exchange for his wicket off the next ball? There was Gifford, the third Worcester bowler in the series, starting his test career. Redpath, growing into the game, studiously yet strongly. Dexter making a truly horrid catch look simple. Tom Vevers, in a real saving innings, digging Australia out of the near disaster of 88 for 6, batting better and more assuredly than his predecessors. But above all, it was the day of Truman's last laugh. 5 wickets for 48. Australia out for 176 sounded like a 3-day match. A few minutes of rain, and then the promise of a fine evening. But Dexter, opening in place of the injured Boycott, gave only a single hint of a bright evening session before he was gone. This quick, vital blow changed the balance of the game. One moment, England were poised to attack, and next, the duty of Edrich and Cowdrey was to resist Australia's justifiably high spirits and play for Monday. On that second day, which but for the weather would have been the fourth, John Edrich reached the high point of the cricketer's ambition. He scored a century in his first innings against Australia, and at Lord's. His partners came and went. Cowdrey and Barrington were quite brief. Parfitt hinted at great aggression, while, somewhat unusually, two Norfolk-born cricketers were batting together for England. 83 for 4. Then, mindful no doubt that the pundits have always declared that English batsmen, and those from Yorkshire in particular, play leg spin badly, Simpson went on himself against Sharp, only to be met with a series of blows which the Yorkshiremen of the past might have regarded, if the word was in their vocabulary, as somewhat overweening. It couldn't last, but it helped England to 138 before it ended. All this time, Edrich, with his grimly upright stance, his strangely boyish look down to make sure that his bat is in place, bristled with all the family hostility towards all England's opponents. He made an impressive character, if not of style, for John Edrich has all his family's courage, application, concentration. Perhaps the best word is simply guts. John Edrich earned his century the hard way, and it must have been the more rewarding that it received royal congratulations, a storybook ending to a piece of brave endeavor. Edrich had achieved much, but he was never allowed to dominate. Australia never let England, even with one batsman firmly set, pull clear. Their fielding was tight and hard all day long. They harried England down to a lead of 70, which could just possibly be important if Australia cracked in the hour and a quarter of batting left for them that night. At this point, tactics demanded that England threw in everything for quick wickets, and Australia resisted. The attack on Laurie's leg stump, now an established gambit, was concentrated ball after ball after ball. Laurie has encountered this before, and the record books show a profit on his side. At the other end, Ian Redpath continued to grow up, his stature increasing day by day. It was Gifford, in the first introduction of spin, who took the wicket of the evening. If a second had fallen, it could well have precipitated crisis. O'Neill, not without the occasional handsome flourish, averted the danger and stayed with Redpath until 6:30. It would strain the longest cricket memory to recall a day of Test cricket so short and indecisive as the last of this second Test, which yet aroused so much and such acrimonious discussion. The situation was, simply enough, that it was a cricketing impossibility, if there is such a thing, for England to lose, so they could crowd Australia, but they didn't. O'Neill went, as he's gone before and will go again, still showing a profit from the stroke, hooking. Then, on down the morning, the endless bout of seam bowling was rolled at the Australians. They scored 65 runs before Titmus demonstrated, ironically enough, that only spin was likely to prove effective against these batsmen. Burge, full of good sense and resolution, and Redpath, cool and thoughtful against pace, were both less assured against spin. In fact, Ian Redpath didn't score a single run after Titmus began to bowl. He stayed for 53 minutes with his score at 36, until at last the barracking and slow hand clapping rattled him. He swung all across the line to Titmus and was LBW. Gifford and Titmus in double harness kept Booth in a state of trepidation. Even Simpson didn't look the player in form that he'd so evidently been for the previous month. Australia were 98 ahead, and there was little more than 3 hours left for play when not Titmuss, nor Gifford, nor Dexter, nor Simpson, but the recurrent enemy of them all, the rain, had the last word on the second test match. All square and 3 to play. Clear weather. A welcoming wink of a bright morning sun. An honest-to-goodness fair wicket. A real cricket wicket, with some pace and some turn in it. A racing fast outfield. And the unfailing Yorkshire crowd. Keen, critical, early about, not prepared to miss a ball. Deeply involved. The Headingley Test match is, for many of them, a major occasion of the summer, a special kind of holiday. Year after year they come, suffering the discomforts of a ground too often too full, but never so full as to kill this dogged keenness. The first burst of news damped a little of the enthusiasm. 2 of the greatest batsmen of the present day, O'Neill with a damaged knee, Cowdrey with a bad back, wouldn't play. Bob Cowper, a pleasant athlete with a good record, and Ken Taylor, currently in form and on his home ground, took their places. Then, England have won the toss. The crowd settled to enjoy itself, yet with that hint of unease that possesses Englishmen whenever England bat, and over the last few years, with good reason. Boycott and Edrich, Mackenzie and Hawke. A real 5-day test opening. We were in the 4th over before Edrich took the first run. Then, as Boycott found his feet, Edrich, well, they say the ball outside the leg stump is his weakness, and weakness or no, it accounted for him this time. Then broke England's bright point. Dexter looked about him, tested out the light and the pace of the pitch. Then he and Boycott began to play with utter majesty and ease. The runs rolled and raced across that level cropped turf, and England were in their glory. But this man Boycott has a grim knack of receiving the near unplayable ball, if anyone does. Here it is, from calling. Straight enough to compel him to play at it, then swinging away late, taking the edge and going to the best slip field in the world. Dexter swept on 4s to his 50 and to lunch and beyond. England's time in the sun was gone. In fact, the sun itself went in, and the underquoted Australian seam bowlers, Hawke with his mighty shoulder heave and outswing and off-cut, Mackenzie of the superb flow and fierce thump of ball into pitch, Calling with his lithe sweep through, made the ball swing and bounce, and they never gave England another moment's peace. Only Parkes batted as if cricket could still be a game, handsomely. Old-fashioned, someone said. But the bowlers had the last word. England had been 74 with only 1 wicket down. 129 for 2. But 268 all out. Neil Hawke, 5 for 75. Second day was Australia's, and for Englishmen, it was an ominously Australian day. True to their image in the English mind, they rallied from what seemed a desperate position, rallied not merely doggedly, but handsomely, aggressively, like the Australians of legend, in a recovery worthy to decide a test rubber, and through an innings by Peter Burge worthy to win the Ashes. Sir Robert Menzies, who has a gift for making affairs of state coincide, but not too closely, with test matches, was lucky once more. Simpson's and Laurie's 50 was Australia's best opening of the series. And after Simpson's pet cut cost him his wicket, Bill Laurie, all angles and resolution, batted as soundly as ever until he and Redpath were faced with Australia's horror of Lords over again. Finger spin at both ends. Gifford at one, Titmuss at the other, closing the game down with flight, length, and just a little turn. A little, but enough. There's no doubt that their stranglehold produced the desperation that had Laurie run out. It was True, returning for a short burst, who ended Cowper's first and brief Test innings. Spinners, Titmuss and Gifford, who truly carried the battle to Australia. Weavers out. Mackenzie out, not very proud of himself. And Australia, 178 for 7, still 90 behind. Burge and Hawke held on against the two spinners for a few almost runless overs. Then, just about in the middle of the Test series, the decision was taken which, though no one knew it at the time, probably settled the Ashes. The new ball was available. The spinners were bowling well, more than just well, but some Test captains, past, present, and perhaps future, agreed with Dexter's decision to take the new ball. Truman and Flavel bowled. Burge and Hawke, freed from the scourge of the spinners, stood up to honest fast medium with something near relief. Gradually, Burge moved out from his embattled defence to build one of the great innings of all Test cricket, something, as his innings grew, akin to majesty.
Well, I must be honest, it gave me probably the most satisfying feeling that I've ever had in cricket, particularly because we're in trouble.
At the other end, Neil Hawke stood with him, at first content to play a defensive second fiddle, but gradually emerging to play an innings for himself. So the partnership grew, 105, from an apparently certain first innings deficit to a lead. At the start of the third day, Wally Grout stood up and hooked Truman with all the command of a batsman whose eye was already in. In fact, he took 10 off the over. This was the right psychological approach. It said plainly enough that Australia had one advantage and proposed to maintain it. Once the tide of a Test match is running, it takes a great player to turn it. England could find no one to do that, as Burge had done it for Australia the day before. 89 for the 9th wicket, another 17 for the 10th, before Burge's historic innings ended with a good catch by the substitute Alan Rees from a wasteful stroke to a bad ball. Australia led by 123. Again, Boycott fell to the deadliest of all balls, the late outswinger. And then England went slowly, but always certainly down the slide to defeat. Peter Parfitt was game to bat at number 3. His first ball broke his hand. Barrington and Edrich had half-righted the boat when Mackenzie again probed Edrich with the short ball down the leg side. Wally Grout was on his way before the stroke was even complete. By now, there was enough turn in the wicket for Tom Weavers, surely the best Australian off-spinner of modern times, to whittle away at Dexter, a Dexter batting in an uncharacteristic hair shirt, eschewing all strokes and eventually, as so often happens to the stroke maker in this situation, out to a half stroke. 24 hours before, England had been winning. Now they were losing, beyond doubt and beyond their ability to change the course of the game. Ken Barrington battled away at the other end. He's earned the right to be in a great England side. So often in his Test career, he's had an innings thrown into his lap with no chance to win, only the hope that he could save it. And he held on for nearly 3 hours, till only 5 minutes from the end of the day. On the 4th day, with Barrington gone, England needed a miracle to save them. But the saving miracles of cricket, apart from days of rain, must be performed by cricketers, and no England cricketer on this day was in miracle-making mood. Peter Parfitt batted with his hand in plaster, characteristic courage when someone luck who was caught off the bat handle. The 6 wickets left went down for 72 runs. So Australia needed 109 to win, and they were 3 for 1 wicket. But they were never in trouble or danger. Simpson and Burge lost their wickets, but there was never any alarm in the Australian dressing room. Ian Redpath grew further towards Test manhood, taking practice against off-spin. And he had the honour and pleasure of playing a stroke, a 4, which gave 2 runs over, that won the match. And though he can only have hoped it at the time, retained the Ashes. To draw first blood alone was matter for celebration for a side that critics had written down. 1 up with 2 to play was a strong position, and for England, a dusty answer. For the 4th Test, Manchester pointed some prosperous fingers to a clear summer sky. The 4th Test, to be remembered for a surfeit of runs and no hope of a result. If ever there was a batsman's paradise, it was at Old Trafford for this game. A true and amiable wicket, a fast outfield. Fine weather, a clear, unglaring light. It was a millionaire's toss to win. Bobby Simpson won it and went in first himself with Bill Lawry, a partnership of much wisdom and experience. They were met by an English reception committee of 3 bowlers all playing in their first Test. Fred Rumsey, the powerfully built fast left armour from Somerset, the Middlesex man John Price, and Tom Cartwright, Warwickshire, all-rounder and bowler of many variations on the medium-pace theme. The first was a day of no give and little take. The out-cricket was tight. Tom Cartwright in particular enforced defence or compelled the stroke to his fieldsman for over after over. In fact, 43 overs in the day. Titmuss and Mortimer were thrifty too. No bowler was more than that. Simpson and Lawry saw no need to hurry. There was an all but impossible chance to Titmuss when Lawry had made 39, and immediately Simpson might have been caught on the leg side. Otherwise, they went ahead certainly and steadily as mainline trains. Lawry pushed away until the opportunity came to hook. He took 3 sixes on the leg side. Simpson, quick on his feet as a dancing master, moved up and back, dictating the bowler's length. They came to 84 at lunch and made their way down the afternoon. Just before 4 o'clock, Lawry played Mortimer through the covers to reach his 3rd Test century against England. A few minutes before tea, the Australian record for the first wicket against England, 180 made in 1909 by Sid Gregory and Warren Bardsley, was at last broken. The 200 came, and we wondered, why not 300, 400, 500? The bowlers seemed to make no impression. and it wasn't a bowler who broke the stand, but this simple, sad run out. Simpson's 100 was only the next landmark. Amazingly enough, his first in a test. He made very certain of it this time. At last, Cartwright's labours were rewarded, with red pounds with it. But the scoreboard at the end of the day had comfort only for the batting side, for the bowlers, a promise of more labour to come.
Fortunately, I never get tired of bowling, and good night's sleep, and I'm ready for the next day.
Again and again, all the second day long, Australia were in utter command. Having made his first test century, Simpson used it as a foundation. Still his feet moved in light, balanced measure to and fro. At the other end, O'Neill, bursting with eagerness, showed his strokes. So did Burge. He even attacked Cartwright and paid for his temerity with his wicket. Who, neat and stylish in every movement, was still not out at the end of the day. But the main thread of the innings continued to be Simpson. Steadily his runs and Australia's ticked up. By 6:30, he had batted longer than anyone has ever done against England in a test, and he was still there, waiting for the third day. The English bowlers were loyal and patient. Cartwright, by his unremitting accuracy, constant invention in face of the juggernaut, and his superb stamina, may even have established his test place, which few bowlers can ever have done, while a total was made against them of 570 for 4, an average of a wicket every 3 hours, at a cost of 140 runs each. Statistically, glorious, but not really war, and barely cricket by the standards of some who ought to know. The third morning would have seemed a frolic but for what had gone before. Simpson, sprightly as ever, giving no sign that he'd batted for 2 whole days, struck the ball now like a schoolboy enjoying himself. Gradually in this innings, he left behind the highest scores of all but one of his famous Australian predecessors. Only Don Bradman's 334 at Leeds in 1930 now stood ahead of him, when, batting like a man with no thought of records, he was caught behind, playing a stroke he wouldn't have contemplated on Thursday or Friday. His was the highest innings ever played at Old Trafford. Booth, unlucky not to make 100, and Reivers helped him in putting on 86 runs in an hour, and Grout threw away his wicket in the acceleration before the declaration. Then Simpson walked out into the field as jaunty as a man freshly back from rest. And England batted with the highest total ever built at Old Trafford looming over them. When John Edwards was taken at slip, the position seemed so completely dispiriting that it demanded high resolution to face it. Boycott, full of belief and determination in the old manner, was there, thinking, as ever, in terms of staying forever. He was joined by a new Dexter, a Dexter responding to the Australian score, and we may suspect, to Simpson's own innings. Batting completely out of character, all concentration, looking 3 days ahead, playing for Tuesday night. The Australian bowlers, fresh and determined, hammered away. But 111 had come for the second wicket, when not even Boycott's quick and careful cover was proof against a ball from Mackenzie, which found undreamt of life and movement in the pitch. Barrington and Dexter stayed to the end, keeping their pads on, as it were, until Monday. And Monday was the day of England's revenge, if revenge has any place in the game of cricket. Now it was the turn of Dexter and Barrington to bat as if time didn't exist. Dexter passed through some anxious moments in the morning, and Vevers and Mackenzie bowled with good imitation of hope. 246 runs came for the third wicket, before, in face of some barracking from a crowd which was by now drunk with runs, Dexter played as if to prove he wasn't to be hurried, and Vevers came by his reward for patience.
Not the sort of innings everybody likes, but still it's quite fun to get runs now and again.
Still it went on until the brain reeled. Yet, down to the close, Neil Hawke produced a terrific effort of fierce aggression. Barrington, who ticked his way steadily to his 150 and passed it, and Parfitt held out to the end of the day, and yet another astronomic scoreboard. Oh dear, 6 hours to go. There can hardly have been a player who didn't feel that in his heart. But again, they buckled to the day's task, meaningless as it now was. Never before have two sides still been fighting for the lead on the fifth day in the airless realms beyond 600. Barrington ploughed steadily on, making England safe, collecting runs unrelentingly. His concentration was matched by Mackenzie's, still full of rhythmic strength, still hammering pace from the pitch, and by Tom Vevers, who began to bowl at the start of play at 11 o'clock and carried on in one unbroken spell until the England innings ended. 611 to the Australian 656, with time left for only 2 overs of Australia's second innings. Time for the mathematicians to calculate that it would have taken another 5 days, all but 10 minutes, to get a result. Simpson had read the pitch and the game aright and retained the Ashes. So to the Oval, home of last tests, ground of farewells, the stage where so many of the great bowed themselves from test cricket. The Oval, dusty, busy, sparrow-haunted, cockney oasis of cricket in southeast London. The Ashes would remain with Australia, but England could still square the rubber, and they brought back Truman, surely grateful to have missed that bowler's graveyard at Old Trafford, and Cowdrey for the task, and Bob Barber from Warwickshire, who opened the innings with Boycott. And what an opening it was. 24 runs off the first 4 overs. Not without a chance, certainly, but with an air of gaiety that made us rub our eyes. Then, from prosperity, England were tumbling into trouble within minutes. This time it was Neil Hawke with his change of angle, his swing and cut that did the damage. First Barber went. Then Boycott, who can never quite believe that he's been bowled. Cowdrey had the most hostile of greetings. And Dexter, after giving us an early surprise, with a most unusual break, could rarely break out of his shackles. 81 for 2 at lunch was much less than England had promised an hour before. The afternoon was Neil Hawke's. Superbly fit, he wanted to bowl and Simpson let him. Gradually, the pro-English gasometer sank. Barrington, on his own Surrey turf, hung on as the wickets went down around him. Titmuss went to as wide a catch by Wally Grout as anyone could imagine. How does he bring them off?
Well, it was one of those catches that, well, it was going down the middle, and I thought, well, I could get it, and I just threw a glove out at it. Hit me in the palm of the hand, and, well, I was just a bit lucky. It actually just stuck there.
Hawke had the last word, 6 for 47, and England, all out, 182. Australia should have batted for an hour, but the light cut that to 14 balls, and Simpson and Laurie batted safely through them to the second day. And this was Laurie's day. Not everyone enjoyed it, but it made Australia all but safe. Truman, in search of 3 more wickets, to be the first man to take 300 wickets in tests, was held firmly at bay. He has bowled faster, but he's also bowled worse than this. Simpson went after seeing the shine off the ball, and soon afterwards O'Neill. But Bill Laurie stayed for more than 5 hours, all concentration and patience, setting Australia beyond defeat. Burge came and struck and went. Booth played with his usual style and certainty, and all the time Bill Laurie was sending down his roots, digging himself a place with the great stonewallers of all time. The day was nearly done before Laurie was out, and then not because of any fallibility in him, but because for the first time the pitch misbehaved when he was on the verge of his century. Cartwright and Titmuss wheeled away steadily, but by the end of yet another day of little sun and no sight screens, Australia was 63 in front with 5 first innings wickets left. On the Saturday, Australia put themselves beyond all but a freak defeat. But it was Fred Truman who stole the day. Redpath had made useful runs. Grout some lively ones. Weavers, a gay and even violent variety of them. And Truman had been hit for 79 runs in the innings without taking a wicket, nor, on this particular morning, looking like taking one, until Dexter brought him back just before lunch. No one could have stage-managed the affair better than Fred Truman. If a novelist or playwright had done it, we should have called it far-fetched. His first ball, a trimmer that wouldn't have been out of place in his greatest days, must have come as a revelation to Redpath, so far as he saw it at all. And to the next ball, Graham Mackenzie produced the reaction every fast bowler would desire of a batsman. Cowdrey did the rest, and off they all went to lunch. Now, Fred Truman would bowl the first ball of the afternoon on a hat-trick, and to be the first man ever to take 300 test wickets. It must have killed the lunchtime bar and refreshment counter trade. Who was going to miss such an historic delivery? Having got us all there, and hanging on to his every movement, Fred missed by a mile, and kept us waiting for over half an hour before he bowled the ball he wanted to Neil Hawke, and found the outside edge. Again, Cowdrey was his accomplice. And there he was. There, after all the controversy, the bad days, being dropped for the Old Trafford game, he'd done it. And we remembered in this moment those wickets thundered, rocketed, and swept away over 12 spectacular, controversial, but never dull years.
The first time this season I could smile, and it was a smile of happiness. At last the pressure was off, and I'd done what I wanted to do, and the only thing wrong is I had to wait so long to do it.
Thereat, Fred nipped in with a 4th wicket, and better figures than Tom Cartwright, who bowled nearly 30 more overs. And Fred came off delighted with himself. Australia 197 on. England batted again with avoidance of defeat, their only reasonable hope. And then, in the perverse way their supporters had come to expect, they batted with the aggression of a side with a game to win. In one case, more than that. Boycott, England's most heartening gain of the series, set about his business with this almost superhuman determination we're coming to associate with him. In fact, he's established himself by character as well as by ability, and Barber played intelligently. 80 for the first wicket, before Mackenzie once more found pace in the pitch greater than anyone else could do, and surprised yet another Test batsman. In came Dexter, and for half an hour strode a splendid, exciting, impossible, yet unforgettable way. From stroke to stroke, he played like a prince or a poor man. The strokes were glorious. The misses were agony. He'd played and missed at Mackenzie outside the off stump more than once before the end of the splendid episode left us in the pit of anticlimax. Titmus was night watchman. There were 2 days left. England was 65 on, with 8 second innings wickets remaining. You may argue as you wish about the 4th day. Was it England's or Australia's? To be sure, England made runs, but did they make enough? Or make them fast enough? Or did Australia contain them, holding them back crucially behind the kind of score that would have given them even half a chance of declaring and winning? The runs certainly came. Boycott made the first century of many that, barring sad accidents, he must surely make in Test cricket. He concentrates so hard, plays so close to his body, so unwinkingly, so straight. The stroke with which he reached his century received the cheers. I won't forget that moment. But the next stroke was, in its way, more significant. He was more determined than ever. The 100 was to be no more than a landmark. It was Simpson with a leg break, so long a deadly weapon against Yorkshiremen, that ended his innings after lunch. Titmus hung on. Briefly, he hit, and hit spectacularly. But in the main, he was content, Bill Lorry fashion, to survive. At the other end, Cowdrey set out to prove he should never have been dropped. Tom Vevers once more bowled on and on. Length, flight and turn. Length, flight and turn. Faithful as a clock, and however hard he worked, happy as a boy. Now Simpson bowled his leg breaks, steadily as a rock. England could not break out. When Mackenzie once more burst through an established batsman by his pace off the pitch, he equalled Clary Grimmett's record for an Australian of 29 wickets in a series in England. Down the rest of the day, Australia bowled tight, fielded keenly, and though Cowdrey could play calmly, even majestically, and Barrington could stay, they could never gallop. At the end, England, 381 for 4, were 184 on with 6 wickets left and a day to go. Was there a chance of a result? We shall never know. The rain came back again. Not a ball was bowled on the last day. Cowdrey never got his 100. Outside the walls of the Oval, the eternally faithful waited. When at last their wait was officially declared in vain, Bobby Simpson could sum up.
But to me personally, it's a wonderful achievement by the team to have come over here under such a cloud and to have done so well.
Under a cloud in more senses than one. What about the weather?
English weather at present is not very good, but I think it's treated us pretty kindly since the second test, and I know a couple of county matches we perhaps would have liked a little bit of English rain, but we couldn't get it.
It wasn't so kind to the followers. Test cricketers bowl and